Correspondent Nancy Liu live for us in California with a flight instructor who can answer some of those questions. So, Nancy, we are talking about a simulation.
Yeah, absolutely, Nichole. We're approaching Toronto Pearson Airport right now. We've input the same weather conditions and time of that day. We've got pilot Robert Thomas at the controls. Tell us what you think of these conditions. We're in a 737, which is obviously bigger than a CRJ 900.
Right.
But both have autopilot. Would the pilots have been in autopilot prior to landing?
To some point, but there is a stage in the flight where autopilot is disengaged, and it's the pilots actually performing the landing of the aircraft. So at this point, we're about 5 miles away from the airport, and you can see the runway out there lighted up. At this point, the autopilot may have been disengaged, but once they get closer inside that 5-mile range, the autopilot will be disengaged, and the pilots will be flying the aircraft.
Okay, so as we're approaching this runway at Toronto, and Toronto has 5 runways, I believe, this is a pretty long runway, right?
It is, I think, over 11,000 feet, so it's a very long runway.
Okay, the conditions, very cold, snow on the ground, and windy.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking as a pilot in making this landing?
Definitely want to think about the wind and how it's going to affect my airspeed. Those two work hand in hand. If I have a lot of wind blowing on my aircraft, it's going to change the amount of wind blowing over my wings, which affects lift. So if I have a gust of wind that hits my aircraft and it dies off, that's going to affect how my aircraft flies. And that's something I want to keep in mind as a pilot.
Okay, and you're feeling winds? I mean, what are the gauges telling you about the winds at this point in our approach?
So definitely we can feel it, but we can get a much more accurate reading here on the 737 MAX in our instrument gauge here. So right here, it's telling us the winds are coming out of the west at 26 knots. So that's telling me the winds are coming from this direction out of our window and blowing towards this way in a westerly fashion. So we're getting pushed this way by the winds, essentially.
And because there was a lot of snow on the ground, Toronto got 20 inches of snow prior to what happened on Monday. With winds, there would be blowing snow on the runway?
Definitely, and that's going to be somewhat of a challenge for the pilots as well, as it can be distracting having that snow blowing across the runway. It can create optical illusion and be something that get in your way of flying.
Would you still be able to see the lighting, though?
The lighting, I believe the lighting should be still viewable. If not, the airport, they do a really good job at clearing that stuff up.
Okay, now, we are pretty close to the runway now, before touchdown. As the pilot, I mean, what do you need to do and really focus on in this moment?
Yeah, so right now I'm focusing on my airspeed, making sure I'm at a good speed, not too fast, not too slow, and making sure I'm aiming for the 2 white bars that are right here in front of us on the runway. And I'm focusing, making sure as best as I can to keep my wings level, keeping my nose right down the runway.
How hard is it with the winds?
It's a challenge, so we have to kind of fight. You can see me moving the yoke around, and even right here, you see that big movement to the left.
Yeah.
That's because the wind is pushing us. So I'm having to correct with my feet, with the rudder pedals, and making sure we don't get blown off the runway.
Oh my, okay, so we're nearing the area where this incident happened, and that plane flipped.
Yes.
Your thoughts on that? I mean, how could that happen?
Not sure. I mean, we're still looking at it. The investigation is still happening, you know, but it could be anything from the wind affecting the aircraft, making it blow sideways.
Right.
Maybe a hard landing as well. It's really hard.
So we've stopped really short on the runway here.
Yes, yes.
So you can give us kind of the vantage point of where this incident happened. And we're turning the plane just so you can see there's that Air Canada building that is in the background of the crash that we've all seen on television, and you know, many people in person. How imperative was that fire crew? I mean, that there are heroes in this story that saved lives.
Oh yeah, definitely. Everybody. I mean, the teamwork all around, and that's the really special thing about the aviation industry, is that everybody is working together to make sure things operate safely. And when things do get crazy, do get a little unsafe, everybody works together to make sure the best outcome is possible.
Absolutely incredible. Robert, thank you so much. Obviously, a safe landing we've made, but it was scary, and when like that
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.